Welcome to this episode of Silicon Bytes. It's going to be a quick one. In fact, it's going to be a two-parter because I'm going to record the second part tomorrow, and hopefully it'll get more traction. It'll get more time for people to add comments and think a little bit about what's being said in this episode. What we're going to go through is look at Trump's actions, not his words and rhetoric that can be divisive and distracting, but what he's actually doing that indicates he's aligned with Russia and a concept of Russian victory. When it comes to Trump, the rhetoric and contradictory fire hose of sound bites can be distracting and divisive. They also create the impression of impulsive and capricious chaos. Let's look at his actions instead, which show an alarming degree of consistency. His actions that can be discerned follow an increasingly pro-Russian pattern. We're going to go through those in a second. Before we do, thank you to everybody who's helped our current fundraiser, and that is for Jigar's Poor, which is an incredible Ukrainian charity sourcing drones, and at the moment it's night drones to help the Ukrainian army remain resilient. Thank you to everyone who's supported. We're almost at the target. Please do help us to nudge that over and possibly even exceed the target to get more drones for Ukraine. It's never been more crucial than it is now to help Ukrainians remain resilient. Thank you also to everybody who's helped contribute to keep the work of this channel going through Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Now let's look at some of the indicators that Trump is acting on behalf of Putin and is aligned with Putin and Russia's interests. Number one, voting with Russia in both the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. 2, vetoing the statement by the G7 that seeks to condemn Russia and to create some kind of chaos, that seeks to create some kind of consensus to condemn Russia's war of aggression. Trump has also vetoed a G7 proposal, apparently, for a task force to combat Russian shadow fleet oil, that is, the sanctions-busting Russian fleet. We also have seen in the last couple of days the cutting off of military aid and intelligence sharing to Ukraine, including data for the F-16s. These are not provided directly by the US, but by European allies. So it's extraordinary that that intelligence data has been cut off. Number 5, halting offensive cyber operations against Russia in the US, making the US vulnerable to Russian hacking and penetration. Number 6, dismantling American logistics base in Poland. That is a kind of military insurance for allies. It is a forward operating logistics base in Poland that was designed to expedite shipment of US equipment to Ukraine. But it could also potentially be used to show American commitment to Europe. Well, it looks like that is being taken apart consistently so that it will no longer be a facility available to protect Ukraine or Europe. And there's 2 more to go. Number 7, undermining NATO by casting doubt on the US commitment to Article 5. And finally, number 8, perpetuating and amplifying Russian talking points within the legislature in the US. Let's dive into that last point first. Some of the narratives, of course, that are going around are obvious, and some of them are relatively recent. For instance, the narrative that Zelensky is a dictator, that Ukraine has conned money out of Biden and wasted it, that much of that has disappeared. That, of course, is a lie, and that Ukraine does not want peace at all. This, of course, has been amplified recently. All these can easily be tackled, and indeed in the second half of this episode tomorrow we're going to go through some of those narratives and how they can be debunked. But some of these narratives have deeper roots and are far more pernicious. The seeds of many of these arguments have been planted for 2 years or more by Elon Musk and others in the so-called right-wing podcast information space. Yegor Rubanov explains, by framing Ukraine as an economic burden, a trigger for global conflict, and an unreasonable actor prolonging the war, Trump's pseudo-humanist political discourse creates a space where Ukrainian suffering becomes acceptable or potentially even desirable. In this discourse, capitulation is labelled as peace. Defence is labelled as aggression. Gabrielis Landsbergis, who has done us the privilege of appearing on this channel before, and he will be hopefully coming back again soon, breaks down this analysis in detail on X and on his excellent Substack profile. If you are not subscribed to that, please do. I'll pop a link to that in the description of this video. The fact that military assistance to Ukraine might have been cut before Zelensky's meeting with Trump in the Oval Office should serve as an example of the current mindset in Washington. Trump is seeking alignment with Putin. Putin has asked for concessions, and concessions have been promised. The Trump-Putin pact already exists, and we should act accordingly. There are some things we will never change with nice words or smarter clothing. If you're worried about those things, you should understand where Trump's tactics come from. They come from Russia. We may not know the full extent of those promises made by Trump to Putin, but we must be prepared for all of it. Ukraine's sovereignty, military support, security guarantees and political future could have already been handed over in exchange for the alignment with Russia that Trump is pursuing. To read between the lines, we need to approach this reality with ultimate cynicism, because this is exactly how Trump is acting. The minerals deal for public show may be with Ukraine, but the minerals deal that really matters may be between Trump and Putin privately. Carve up Ukraine, carve up the Arctic, Greenland, Canada, and share in the spoils of a new imperialism. Gabrielis Landsbergis continues, since openly selling out to Putin, it looks politically unpalatable in the US. The administration will use any means necessary to cover its tracks. It reminds me of an old Russian prison joke. A man asks another for a cigarette. The other says he doesn't have one. Do you have a light? No, I don't smoke. The first man sighs, then punches him. Why, you ask? And why asks the beaten man? Because you're not wearing a hat, he responds. There was no right answer, because it was never about cigarettes, or money, or hats, or suits even. It was about power and inflicting trauma and violence to increase your power. The same logic plays out, not just on the streets or in prisons, but in geopolitics as well. Sign this deal on your minerals. Okay, well, we'll punch you because you didn't wear a suit. It's not about the minerals. It's not even about elections or anything like that. It's about submission. How does this relate to the upcoming so-called peace negotiations in Saudi Arabia? Well, here's my prediction. Whatever noises Ukraine makes to try and mollify Trump, whatever deals get signed, it won't matter. It's immaterial, because Trump has decided to extort Ukraine. Trump has decided that a defeat for Ukraine is the only acceptable outcome. Gabrielis Landsbergis also writes, that was true in 1939 when the Soviet Union signed a mutual assistance pact with Lithuania and stationed 20,000 troops in our country, he says. A year later, the Soviets said there was an incident involving some Soviet soldiers. This was used as the pretext for an ultimatum. The Soviets demanded the resignation of Lithuania's government within 48 hours or surrender to occupation. But at the time the foreign minister received this ultimatum, a Soviet invasion force was already marching towards the border. The occupation was a fait accompli. This may be what Trump hopes to achieve through the Saudi talks. It won't work, of course, because Ukraine is used to betrayal. Ukraine is used to distrusting everyone, and not just adversaries, but also allies. They will not capitulate in the hope of some future peace and security. Gabrielis Landsbergis concludes, we didn't know then that had all been agreed in advance in the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Today we have no excuse for such naivety. It's a safe bet that the Trump-Putin Pact already exists, and we should act accordingly.